The night Hannah Whitmore stopped on a frozen mountain road wasn't the first time she saw someone about to die. It was the first time she chose not to look away. 12 years earlier, she had obeyed an order and walked back into safety, leaving a civilian behind in the dark. That person never made it out. Now, in the middle of a Montana blizzard, with the engine idling and the past screaming louder than the wind, her dog Axel did something she couldn't ignore. He growled. He pulled the seatbelt. He forced her to stop. What Hannah didn't know yet was that this single moment, this decision to stay, would rewrite not only her guilt, but the fate of a broken family standing in the snow ahead. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Snow pressed down on the Montana mountains, thick and unbroken, as if the night itself had decided to stay. Hannah Whitmore drove alone through the storm, hands steady on the wheel, eyes fixed on the narrow tunnel of road carved by her headlights. She did not turn on the radio. She never did. Silence was easier to manage than voices. At 35, she carried herself with the quiet discipline of a former soldier. Upright posture, controlled breathing, movements economical and precise. Her dark green military parka was old, the fabric softened by years of weather and use, the kind of coat a person keeps not for warmth alone, but for memory. Her dark hair fell loose around her face, streaked slightly with gray she never bothered to hide. There was strength in her frame, lean and practiced, but also a fatigue that lived behind her eyes. She was not traveling toward anything. She was only putting distance between herself and a past that refused to stay buried. 12 years earlier, in a place far from Montana, Hannah had followed an order: retreat, fall back. The words had been clear, clean, professional. A civilian had been trapped beyond the line, confused, injured, calling out in a voice that did not belong on a battlefield. Hannah remembered turning her head once, just once, before forcing herself to move with her unit. The man did not survive the night. Hannah did. Medals came later. So did the silence. From that day on, she lived with the certainty that obedience had saved her life and cost someone else theirs. Survival, she learned, could feel a lot like cowardice when replayed in the dark. The truck moved slowly now, tires crunching over ice, wind rocking the chassis with heavy, impatient hands. Hannah's breath fogged the windshield each time she exhaled. Beside her, Axel shifted. He was a full-grown German Shepherd, broad-chested and powerful, his sable and black coat dusted with snow that clung stubbornly to his fur. At 5 years old, Axel carried himself with calm authority, ears upright, eyes alert, every muscle ready without tension. He wore only a simple black rescue collar with a metal tag that clicked softly when he moved. Hannah trusted Axel more than she trusted most people. He had never failed her, not once. The growl came low and sudden, vibrating through the cab. Axel lunged forward, teeth catching the seatbelt strap, pulling hard. The sound cut through Hannah like a blade. She slammed the brakes, the truck skidding sideways before settling with a shudder. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but recognition. Axel did not react without reason. The headlights swept across the road and found them, shapes in the snow, moving against the wind. A man stood there, tall but bowed by exhaustion, his coat thin and stiff with ice. He was somewhere near 40, his face roughened by stubble and weather, eyes hollow but alert. In his arms he carried a small child wrapped in layers that were no match for the storm. 2 more children followed close behind, their steps uneven, bodies trembling. The man did not wave. He did not shout. He only kept walking, jaw set, as if stopping would mean something inside him might finally break. Hannah opened the door and stepped into the wind. Snow bit at her cheeks, found its way into her boots, down her collar. The man looked at her then. His voice, when he spoke, was low and worn, the voice of someone long past asking for help. "We're fine," he said, even as his arm shook from holding the child. Hannah saw the lie for what it was. Not pride, but protection. She stood there, the storm roaring around them, time folding in on itself. 12 years ago, she had turned away from a man who needed her. Tonight, the past had come back and placed itself directly in her path, wrapped in children's coats and frostbitten silence. Axel stepped forward, placing himself between Hannah and the family, not aggressive, not afraid, simply present, staying. Hannah felt something loosen in her chest. She raised her voice just enough to carry through the wind. "Come with me," she said. Then quieter, as if speaking to herself as much as to them, "This time, I'm not leaving anyone behind." Wind circled the trees, and the cabin stood low and patient, a single square of light pressed into the dark. Inside Hannah Whitmore's cabin, the fire caught slowly, as fires do when the wood is damp and the night has had too much say. The flames leaned, then straightened. Heat crept along the floorboards, up the walls, into fingers that had gone stiff with cold. The place smelled of pine sap and old iron. Axel lay across the threshold, his broad back to the children, his dark eyes fixed on Caleb Whitaker. Not a threat, a promise. 5 years old, heavy in the chest and steady in the shoulders, the German Shepherd did not bark. He simply stayed where staying mattered. Hannah watched the man lower himself onto a chair. Caleb was close to 40, tall but folded inward by long habit, his coat thin and rimmed with frost. A rough beard shadowed his jaw. His voice, when he murmured to the children, was quiet and careful, like someone speaking around broken glass. He held the smallest child against his chest, hands trembling from cold and from the kind of fear that doesn't leave when the danger passes. Hannah recognized that fear. It was the fear of believing warmth might be taken away just as quickly as it arrived. She poured water into a kettle and set it near the fire, listening to the soft, familiar sounds, the tick of cooling metal, the pop of resin. Her parka hung from a peg, heavy and dark, the sleeves creased where her arms always bent. She did not ask questions. Questions were sharp. Silence, she knew, could be kind. The children huddled together on a rug, their coats mismatched, their boots too thin. Axel shifted just enough to block a draft, his flank rising and falling with slow breaths. Hannah noticed how the children watched the dog before they watched her. That was fine. Trust often arrived on 4 legs. She thought of the night long ago when she had learned to move without looking back, and felt the weight of that lesson settle in her bones. Here, she told herself, no one would be rushed. No one would be ordered away from the fire. Caleb's eyes kept returning to the door as if he expected it to open on its own. He spoke little. When he did, his words were spare and practical. Thank you, they would warm up. They would not stay long. Hannah heard the practiced lie beneath them. She caught the way his hands never left the child, the way he angled his body to place himself between the door and the small circle of warmth. Widowhood had etched itself into him, so had something darker. Hannah recognized the signs, the way he flinched at a creak of wood, the way he measured his answers. He had learned to survive by leaving early, by keeping his children moving, by not trusting roofs. Axel rose once, padded closer, then settled again with his head on his paws. The dog's gaze softened, but it did not wander. The kettle began to whisper. Hannah poured cups and set them down, careful not to crowd. Steam lifted. The children's hands curled around the warmth. One of them began to breathe more evenly. Caleb's shoulders dropped a fraction, then tensed again, as if he had caught himself relaxing. Hannah met his eyes only briefly. There was no pressure in her look, just room. The night went on like that, wood fed to flame, snow sliding from the roof with a hush, Axel's quiet vigilance stitching the room together. Hannah sat back, letting the silence do its work. She felt the old ache in her chest ease, not vanish, but soften. She thought of orders and obedience, and the way a life could hinge on a step taken or refused. Here, in the low light, she made a smaller vow. She would keep the fire fed. She would keep the door closed. She would let trust arrive at its own pace. Axel lifted his head and met her eyes as if he had heard. Outside, the wind slowed. Inside, something held. For the first time in years, Hannah believed that staying could be enough. Night pressed close to the cabin, and the fire thinned to a careful glow, as if even the flames were listening. The child's skin went pale first, then gray, the small chest rising too slowly. Hannah felt the room tilt. Years of training told her what she was seeing, but training does not quiet the heart. She knelt, hands hovering, afraid of doing too much, afraid of doing nothing. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He was a man near 40, worn thin by nights without sleep, beard rough along his jaw, eyes dark with a fear he had learned to hide for his children's sake. He whispered the child's name again and again, as if repetition could keep warmth from leaving. Axel moved without command. The German shepherd lowered himself, broad and heavy, and pressed his body along the child's side. Thick sable fur met fragile skin. The dog's breathing slowed, then matched the child's, steady and patient. Hannah watched the way Axel stayed. No urgency, no doubt. The old rescue instincts ran clean and true. Heat passed. Color returned. The child shuddered once, then breathed. Hannah closed her eyes. In that quiet, she understood something simple and terrible. Axel had done what she once could not. He had stayed when staying was the difference between life and loss. When the danger eased, the room did not rush back to speech. Silence held them together. One of the older children wandered to the corner where Hannah kept her things, a habit born of long nights spent watching adults for signs of safety. Small fingers opened a tin box and found the metal, a chain, a tag. The clink was soft, but it cut deep. Caleb saw it and went still. He did not reach for it. He did not look away. The tag lay in Hannah's palm, dull with age, the numbers worn by years of touch. It was his wife's. 12 years gone, lost in a mountain slide while pulling a trapped soldier free. Caleb's voice came low, steady in a way that frightened Hannah more than shouting would have. He spoke of snow roaring like a river, of a choice made without witnesses, of a woman who believed staying was the only honest answer. Hannah felt the room shrink. She told the truth because there was no other ground to stand on. She had been the one pulled from the wreck. She had lived. The words were plain. The cost was not. Caleb stood and walked into the storm as if the wind might carry him somewhere less sharp. Snow took his shoulders. The door closed. Hannah remained by the fire, the tag heavy in her hand. She thought of orders and outcomes, of how lives are braided together without asking permission. Outside, the night worked its old arithmetic. Inside, Axel settled back near the child, eyes lifted to Hannah's face. There was no judgment there, only the simple fact of presence. Hannah fed the fire. She placed the tag back where it belonged. She breathed until her hands stopped shaking. She did not chase Caleb into the dark. She had learned that some reckonings require stillness. When the wind eased, she whispered a promise she could keep. She would tell the truth. She would stay. Whatever came next, she would not turn away again. Morning arrived thin and gray, the kind that carries more weight than light. Evan Whitaker came with the day, his truck grinding to a stop outside the cabin as if the land itself resisted him. He was in his early 40s, tall, clean-cut, wearing a dark coat too neat for the mud, his boots polished, his jaw freshly shaved. Control lived in the lines of his face. Sheriff Robert Keene stepped out behind him, broader, slower, a man in his late 50s with a weathered look and a heavy jacket that had seen many winters. Keene's voice was calm, measured, the kind that had learned to wait before deciding. Evan spoke first. His words were sharp and tidy, accusations laid out like paperwork. He said Caleb had taken the children without permission. He said there were rules. Inside, the room tightened. Caleb stood near the wall, beard untrimmed, eyes hollow from a night without rest. His instinct rose fast and familiar. Leave, take the children, disappear. He reached for his coat. Hannah felt the pull of it, that old logic that said distance was protection. Axel moved before anyone else could speak. The German shepherd lay down across the doorway, his body broad and unyielding. No growl, no bark, just refusal. The children pressed close to Caleb, fingers curling into his sleeves. The room held its breath. Caleb looked down at Axel, then at his children. The smallest one clung to his leg, trembling. He had learned to run early, from rooms where voices turned cold, from hands that closed too tight. Running had kept them alive. Standing still felt dangerous, almost foolish. Evan's gaze flicked to the dog, annoyance flashing across his face. "Move him," he said. His voice carried authority without warmth. Sheriff Keene watched instead of speaking. He noticed how the children leaned away from Evan without being told. He noticed the bruises, old and new, hidden badly beneath sleeves. He noticed how Axel's eyes never left Evan, how the dog's posture stayed low and steady, ready but restrained. Hannah stepped forward then. She spoke softly, her voice rough from smoke and sleeplessness. She did not argue law. She spoke of nights and fear and the way children learn silence. Keene listened. Evan shifted, impatience breaking through his composure. He took a step toward the children. Axel's chest lifted. A low growl rolled through the room, not loud, not wild, a line drawn. Evan stopped. The sound changed the air. Sheriff Keene raised a hand, palm open. "That's enough," he said, and meant it. They talked for a long time, not the loud kind, the kind that wears truth down to its shape. Keene asked questions without accusation. Caleb answered with his eyes on the floor, voice quiet but steady. He spoke of doors locked from the outside, of threats that came dressed as concern, of leaving because staying had started to feel like surrender. Hannah stood beside him, not touching, just present. She told Keene what she had seen, what the night had brought, what the children's bodies had already said. Axel sat now, his head near the smallest child's knee, breathing slow. The growl had passed. Its work was done. Evan's certainty thinned. His words came faster, sharper. Keene's gaze stayed level. When he spoke again, it was with the weight of experience. There would be a report. There would be distance. Protection orders spoken of like boundaries rather than punishment. Evan's face tightened, control slipping. He left without looking back. Snow took his tracks quickly. The cabin exhaled. Caleb sank into a chair, hands covering his face. The children leaned into him. Hannah felt something settle. Staying had not broken them. It had held. By afternoon, light found its way through the windows, pale but honest. Sheriff Keene stood to leave, his voice gentler now. "You did right," he told Caleb. To Hannah, he nodded once. Recognition without praise. Outside, the wind had eased. Axel followed Keene to the door, then returned, choosing the rug by the fire. The children watched him like he was a story they wanted to believe. Caleb spoke then, a promise made small so it could be kept. He would not run again. Not today, not from this. Hannah fed the fire and felt the old knot in her chest loosen. Forgiveness, she knew, was not a moment. It was a practice. Axel rested his head on his paws, eyes open, guarding nothing now but the quiet. In that stillness, something like trust took root. It was fragile. It was real. And for the first time, it felt enough. Spring came quietly, the way it does when winter has taken all it can. The snow withdrew from the porch boards first, leaving dark rings in the wood where cold had sat for months. Hannah Whitmore noticed the light before she noticed anything else. It lingered longer in the mornings, slipped through the cabin windows with less apology. She stood at the sink, sleeves rolled, listening to water move through old pipes, thinking how seasons do not ask permission to change. Axel waited by the door, his sable coat shedding its winter weight, ears lifting at every small sound. Hannah had filled out the papers weeks ago, her handwriting careful, steady. A local search and rescue program. Nothing heroic, just work that mattered. She watched Axel step onto the training field for the first time, 5 years old, broad-backed, calm, meeting other dogs without challenge, without fear. The handler, a woman in her 40s with a weathered smile and a voice made gentle by practice, nodded once. "He's already doing the job," she said. Hannah felt something settle. Not pride. Relief? Axel was not being asked to become something new. He was being recognized for what he already was. In the evenings, Hannah walked home under thinning clouds, the ground damp with meltwater, and felt the old ache loosen further. Guilt had taught her to move. Hope was teaching her to stay. The town heard about the night in the storm the way towns always do, piecemeal, softened by retelling. At the community center, the walls smelled of varnish and coffee. Folding chairs scraped. Children's laughter found corners to hide in. The drawings went up without ceremony. Crayon lines and uneven paint. Axel in the snow, Axel between people, Axel watching. Hannah stood at the back, hands in her pockets, her parka still carrying the shape of her shoulders. Caleb Whitaker stood near the door, beard trimmed now, eyes clearer. He did not speak much. He never had. But he stayed. The children pressed close to him, their coats newer, their boots dry. One pointed at a picture and smiled, the kind that reaches the eyes. Hannah felt tears come and did not wipe them away. She understood then that she was no longer living to balance a ledger. She was living to keep a door open. Axel patted across the room, head level, accepting pats without seeking them. He was not Hannah's dog in that space. He belonged to the story the town was learning to tell itself, that stopping could be a form of courage. Caleb had found a rhythm, work during the day, supper together at night. He learned to leave the lights on. He learned that doors could be closed without being locked. Sometimes he stood on the porch after the children slept, listening to frogs start their work by the creek. He thought of running less often now. When he did, the thought passed like weather. He spoke once to Hannah, voice low, about promises he had broken by keeping them. She listened without fixing anything. That was enough. Axel lay between them, head on his paws, eyes open. The children slept in a room warmed by lamps and breath. Hannah noticed how the house sounded different, wood settling instead of complaining, wind finding its way around corners instead of through them. She understood that forgiveness had not erased the past. It had changed how the past lived in her. She was not trying to make up for anything anymore. She was trying to be present. That felt harder. It also felt honest. On the last day of training, rain fell thin and steady, tapping the tin roof like a patient hand. Axel completed the course without hurry. He found the marker. He stayed until told otherwise. Hannah signed the final form and thanked the handler. Outside, she paused, breathing in wet earth and cut grass. She thought of orders given and followed, of nights where moving had been the only answer. She thought of a child breathing again, of a door blocked by a dog who refused pain, its old path. She turned toward home. The porch light was on. Caleb waved once, small, from the window. Inside, 3 children slept. The world, she knew, did not need heroes. It needed witnesses. It needed people willing to stop when stopping mattered. Hannah rested her hand on Axel's collar, feeling the steady pulse beneath. For the first time, that felt like enough. If this story reached you tonight, know this. You are not invisible. The quiet days, the aching joints, the long hours alone, God sees them all. Even when the body weakens, your life still carries meaning. Sometimes hope arrives softly, asking only that you stay. Please share this story with someone who feels alone. Leave a comment. Subscribe if you wish to walk with us again. May God bless you, guard your health, and bring warmth to your days.